The sound of the slap still echoes in my mind like a thunderclap that split my life in two. 1 second I was standing there, surrounded by flowers, champagne glasses, and laughter, and the next, her hand cut through the air like a blade. Juliet's palm crashed against my cheek with such force that I staggered backward. My glasses flew from my face, skittering across the polished ballroom floor until they shattered into tiny fragments beneath the golden chandelier light. For a moment, silence reigned. Not the comforting kind of silence you find in the stillness of dawn, but the kind that suffocates, that makes the walls close in around you. 130 pairs of eyes locked on me, and I wished the ground would open and swallow me whole. My cheek burned hot, but it was nothing compared to the fire in my chest. It wasn't just the pain of a slap. It was humiliation. It was betrayal. It was the breaking of something that should never have been broken. Juliet's voice, sharp and shrill, cut through the suffocating quiet. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she screamed, her words dripping with venom. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space. Hand over the keys, Aurora. Ethan and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us." Her pristine white wedding gown sparkled under the ballroom lights, her face flawless with makeup, her lips curved in cruel triumph. She looked like a queen delivering a sentence of exile. And me? I was the old, worn-out peasant at her feet, trembling, broken glasses scattered like symbols of my broken dignity. I scanned the room, desperately, foolishly, searching for a kind face, for someone, anyone, who might step forward and stop this madness. But no one moved. The guests shifted in their seats. Some looked away, their gazes dropping to their champagne flutes as if fascinated by the bubbles. Others whispered behind manicured hands, eyes darting between me and the bride. Not one person rose to defend me. And then my gaze landed on him. My son. My Ethan. The boy I had carried for 9 long months, the child I had raised with sleepless nights and endless sacrifices, the man who now stood just a few feet away, frozen. His eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on the floor. As if I didn't exist. As if his mother had just become invisible. The slap was a wound, but Ethan's silence was the knife that twisted inside it. I bent down, my hands shaking uncontrollably, trying to gather the shards of my glasses. The cold marble floor pressed against my knees, and the sound of glass scraping against stone seemed louder than the music that had stopped mid-note. My vision blurred with tears, but I forced myself to keep moving, to pick up the pieces, to do anything but stand there and crumble in front of them all. Every shard I picked up seemed to whisper to me, "You are nothing. You are unwanted. You are disposable." When I finally rose, clutching the broken pieces to my chest, my tears streaming freely down my face, Juliet's voice came again, sweeter now but laced with poison. "You're not welcome here anymore. This is my wedding, my life. Ethan and I deserve happiness. You're just in the way." Her words sliced deeper than the slap ever could. In that moment, I wasn't just an old woman. I was an intruder, an obstacle, a burden to be removed. The room was so still I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the faint clink of ice in abandoned glasses, the nervous cough of someone too cowardly to speak. Every eye was on me, and yet not one person saw me, not as a human being, not as a mother, not as someone deserving of respect. I felt small. Smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. And yet, inside, something began to stir. Because that slap wasn't just a blow to my face. It was the final straw. For years, I had endured Juliet's barbed comments, the snide remarks about my old car, my discount store clothes, my part-time job at the flower shop. I had swallowed my pride, smiled weakly, and told myself that for my son's sake, for Ethan's sake, I could endure it. But this public humiliation, this audacity to strip me of my dignity in front of 130 witnesses, this demand that I hand over the keys to the life I had built with my husband, the life I had sacrificed for, that was a line that could not be crossed. I rose slowly, deliberately, feeling all those eyes on me like daggers. My body trembled, but my spine felt straighter than it had in years. I could taste salt and blood on my lips where the slap had split the skin, and I let the tears run freely down my cheeks. Let them see. Let them all see the cruelty of what had just been done. Inside, memories flooded me, Ethan as a child running into my arms after scraping his knee, his first day of school, the nights I stayed up with him when he had fevers. I thought of Robert, my late husband, how he had worked 2 jobs so we could keep that apartment, how he had whispered to me on his deathbed, "Take care of our home, Aurora. It's your sanctuary." And here, on the very night my son was supposed to begin a new life, that sanctuary was being stolen from me, not by strangers, but by my own flesh and blood, the woman he chose, and the silence he gave. As I turned toward the exit, clutching the broken glasses like a talisman, I knew something inside me had changed forever. That slap wasn't just humiliation. It was awakening. They thought they had silenced me. They thought they had broken me. But what they didn't realize, what Juliet with her venomous smile and Ethan with his cowardly silence could never have imagined, was that they had just unleashed the real Aurora Hughes. And the world they built on lies and greed was about to crumble. If humiliation at the wedding was the explosion, then the years before it were the slow-burning fuse. A fuse made of whispered insults, polite smiles that hid contempt, and small humiliations that, one by one, chipped away at my dignity. It began the first time Juliet set foot in my apartment. Ethan had brought her to meet me, his face glowing with pride, his voice full of excitement. "Mom, this is Juliet. She's the one." I had wanted to be welcoming, to embrace the woman who would hold my son's heart. But when Juliet crossed the threshold, her expression betrayed her before she said a single word. Her painted lips stretched into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and those eyes, sharp, calculating, swept across my modest living room like an appraiser evaluating damaged goods. "Seriously," she muttered, not even bothering to lower her voice, "this is where Ethan's mom lives." The words cut like glass, though I pretended not to hear. I told myself she was young, that she didn't yet understand that a home is not about luxury but about love, about memories, about the quiet comfort of 4 walls that had sheltered a family for decades. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. From that day, every visit became a test of endurance. Juliet would sit on my second-hand couch, her designer handbag perched like a trophy beside her, and make observations that stung more than outright insults. "Aurora, don't you think this place is a bit outdated?" she would say, her eyes lingering on my faded curtains. "At your age, wouldn't it be safer in one of those modern senior apartments with elevators and 24-hour staff?" I would smile politely, pour her tea into my chipped floral cups, and remain silent. Ethan would nod along, never once defending me, never once telling her to stop. Then it was my clothes. "Aurora, don't you have anything more modern to wear?" she asked at a family dinner, her perfectly manicured fingers tugging at her silk blouse as she eyed my simple cardigan. "Or my car? That old thing? It's dangerous for you to drive such an outdated model," she said with mock concern. The others at the table laughed softly, complicit in her cruelty. Ethan laughed too, though his eyes darted nervously toward me. That hurt most of all. Next came my work at the flower shop. I only worked 3 days a week, not because I needed the money, but because I loved the scent of roses, the company of my neighbors, the feeling of being useful. But Juliet twisted even that into a flaw. "I don't understand why a woman your age is still working," she said one afternoon, sipping champagne at my kitchen table. "Shouldn't you be relaxing instead of tiring yourself out?" To her, my life was nothing but a collection of deficiencies. My modest furniture, my careful spending, my plain clothes, all signs, in her eyes, of a woman who had failed. What she never knew, what no one knew, was that this life was a choice. My late husband, Robert, and I had decided decades ago to live modestly, to hide our true wealth from the world. We believed that visible riches attracted only trouble. But Juliet wasn't interested in who I was. She only cared about what I had, or rather, what she thought I had. The pressure mounted as the wedding approached. What began as subtle digs grew into direct demands. "Aurora," she said at a family dinner 3 months before the ceremony, "you really should think about moving to a smaller place. That apartment is far too big for you. Besides, Ethan and I are thinking of having kids. We'll need more space. Her words, delivered with a sugary smile, were daggers in disguise. She framed it as concern for me, but her eyes gleamed with something colder, entitlement. The worst moments weren't when she spoke. They were when Ethan echoed her words, like a puppet repeating its master. "Mom," he said one evening, his voice rehearsed, "Juliet is right. Maybe it would be better for you to move somewhere smaller, somewhere easier to manage. It's for your own good." My own good. The phrase became a weapon, wielded again and again to corner me, to make me feel incompetent, old, irrelevant. Their campaign intensified. Juliet began bringing real estate brochures to my apartment, spreading them across my coffee table like a business presentation. "Look at these, Aurora," she said sweetly. "These communities are wonderful. Prepared meals, medical services, social activities. You'd have friends your own age. Doesn't that sound better than rattling around alone in a big apartment?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that my apartment wasn't just walls and furniture. It was where Robert and I had spent our last years together, where his laughter still echoed in the creaking floorboards, where his scent lingered in the books he had left behind. It was the place where he had died in my arms, whispering that he loved me. And she wanted to strip that from me as if it were nothing more than a transaction. But I said nothing. I smiled faintly, nodded, and tucked the brochures into a drawer I would later burn. The humiliation reached its peak when she brought her parents into the conspiracy. One evening, she arrived at my apartment with Ethan and her mother and father in tow. "Aurora," her mother said, her voice dripping with false concern, "we believe it's time you started making responsible decisions about your future." Her father, a burly man with greedy eyes, added, "At your age, living alone is not only unnecessary but dangerous. What if you fall and no one finds out for days?" I sat in my own living room, surrounded, cornered, outnumbered. And my son, my Ethan, nodded silently beside them, betraying me with his silence. It was a perfectly planned ambush. They spoke of safety, of well-being, but what they wanted was obvious: my home. My sanctuary. I felt the anger boiling inside me, but I swallowed it. I let them talk. I let them believe they were winning. Because I knew that a day would come when their arrogance, their disdain, their greed would turn into their downfall. But in those moments, sitting in my own home while strangers told me I didn't belong there anymore, I felt smaller than ever before. Each comment, each patronizing smile, each dismissive laugh, they were acid on my soul. I was Aurora Hughes, a woman who had survived hardship, who had chosen simplicity over show, who had sacrificed for love and family. And yet, in their eyes, I was nothing but an old woman to be pushed aside, stripped of dignity, and discarded like yesterday's newspaper. For 2 years, I endured their disdain in silence. For 2 years, I bore their insults, believing I could protect my son from the truth. For 2 years, I let myself be treated like a burden, a relic, a shadow of a person. But the slap that shattered my glasses and my silence, was the moment I knew the pretending was over. They had mistaken humility for weakness. They had mistaken patience for surrender. And they had mistaken me for someone who could be broken. Betrayal doesn't strike all at once. It seeps in like poison, slow and invisible, until the moment it finally kills. For me, the moment came not with a shout, not with another slap, but with papers. Cold, lifeless papers that told me more about my son than his eyes ever had. It began with whispers. A neighbor mentioned seeing Juliet with a man carrying a briefcase outside my building, pointing at my windows as though she were already the owner. "They looked like real estate people," he said, concern etched on his face. I laughed it off, told him he must be mistaken. But inside, my stomach turned. So I called an old friend, Amelia, who worked in real estate. "Look into Juliet and Ethan for me," I asked quietly. Discreetly. Days later, her voice on the phone was heavy. "Aurora, you need to sit down." She told me what I had already begun to suspect. Ethan and Juliet were drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out. 3 months behind on rent. A wedding financed by loans they couldn't afford. Cars they flaunted in front of me were nothing more than shiny cages of debt. They weren't building a life, they were patching holes in a sinking ship. And my apartment, the home I had guarded for decades, was their lifeboat. When I hung up, I sat in my armchair staring at the walls that had heard my laughter and my sobs for 40 years. Suddenly, they felt different, like prey being hunted. Juliet's comments, her disdain for my home, her obsession with me moving, it all made sense now. She hadn't married Ethan for love. She had married him for access. To me. To what was mine. The betrayal cut deeper because it wasn't just her. It was Ethan. My Ethan. My son, who had once clutched my hand in the middle of the night when nightmares woke him, who had kissed my cheek before leaving for college, promising to make me proud. That same son was now complicit. He had allowed this woman to twist him, to convince him that I wasn't his mother but his obstacle. I tried to deny it. I told myself maybe Ethan didn't know. Maybe Juliet had hidden her schemes from him. But then I saw the proof with my own eyes. It was a rainy afternoon when I decided to check the drawer in Ethan's old desk, the one where he sometimes left papers when visiting. I don't know what pushed me to look, intuition, perhaps, or the quiet voice of Robert in my mind whispering, "Aurora, be cautious." Inside, beneath old envelopes and receipts, I found it. A draft contract, poorly hidden, with my name forged across the bottom. My signature, shaky but unmistakably mimicked. It was a preliminary document, transferring rights of my apartment to Ethan and Juliet. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands trembled so violently the paper nearly slipped from my grasp. My own son, my flesh and blood, was preparing to steal from me. Not ask. Not plead. But steal, by fraud if necessary. I sank into the chair, the room spinning. Images bombarded me, Ethan as a boy blowing out birthday candles, Ethan at his graduation, Ethan laughing with his father. Had all of it been a lie? Or had I simply raised a man who no longer remembered the values we lived by? When I confronted him that evening, he didn't deny it. His face was pale, his words defensive. "Mom, you don't understand. Juliet and I, we're struggling. We thought maybe it would be easier if the apartment transitioned. As if my home, my sanctuary, was nothing more than an object to be shuffled around on a chessboard. And the signature? I asked, my voice shaking with rage. He swallowed hard. It was Juliet's idea. Just a draft. We weren't going to use it unless, his voice trailed off, but I heard the rest in the silence, unless you refused to cooperate. I slapped the papers onto the table between us. "How dare you?" I whispered, tears burning my eyes. "How dare you look at me and think you have the right to take what your father and I built with our blood? How dare you betray me like this?" But he didn't meet my gaze. He stared at the floor, the same way he had in the ballroom after Juliet's slap. And in that moment, I understood the truth. Ethan was gone. The boy I had raised was gone. What stood before me was a man who had chosen greed over love, silence over loyalty, betrayal over blood. The pain was unbearable, like losing Robert all over again. But this was worse. Death had taken my husband, but betrayal had stolen my son. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs. This home had been my fortress, my refuge, my last link to Robert. And now, the people I should have trusted most were circling it like vultures. The next morning, I called Carlos, my financial advisor. My voice trembled, but my words were steel. "Carlos, it's Aurora. I need the documents. The ones we discussed years ago. It's time." There was a pause on the line, then his calm, professional voice. "Mrs. Hughes, once we do this, there's no going back." "Are you sure?" I looked around my apartment, my eyes landing on the photograph of Ethan as a boy, his arms around Robert's neck, both of them smiling. My throat tightened. "Yes," I said. "I'm sure." My son has chosen his path. Now I must choose mine. When I hung up, I realized something with chilling clarity: the greatest betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people you love most, the ones who should protect you, who should stand by you, who should remember your sacrifices. Juliet's greed had hurt me, but Ethan's silence, his complicity, that was the wound that would never fully heal. I stood at the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, and whispered to the empty room, "Robert, forgive me." I tried to protect him. I tried to keep the family whole. But our son is gone. And with that, my tears dried. Because what remained wasn't just pain. It was anger. And anger, I knew, could be forged into something stronger. They thought I was weak. They thought I was helpless. They thought they could strip me of my dignity, my home, my very identity. But they had underestimated me. The betrayal that had broken my heart was about to become the fire that remade me. Anger is useless if it burns only inside you. To become power, it must be sharpened, focused, and unleashed at the right moment. By the time I discovered the forged contract, something inside me had shifted forever. I was no longer just a grieving widow, no longer a fragile old woman clinging to memories. I had become something harder, colder, steel forged in betrayal. I knew Ethan and Juliet thought me weak. That was their greatest mistake. The first step of my counterattack was silence. Not weakness, but strategy. I acted as though nothing had happened. I let them believe their plan was working. I let Juliet continue to smirk at family dinners, dropping her venomous little hints about how dangerous it was for me to live alone. I let Ethan avoid my eyes, his guilt simmering just beneath the surface. I smiled. I nodded. And all the while, I was preparing. I contacted Carlos again, my advisor, and asked him to come to the apartment one afternoon. When he arrived, briefcase in hand, I felt Robert's presence in the room. Carlos had been our trusted man for decades. He had known my husband, had toasted our anniversaries. He sat across from me at the old oak table and laid out the documents with quiet efficiency. "Here is the legal defense we put in place years ago," he said, his voice calm. "Your will. Your ownership deeds. And this," he tapped a thick folder, "the protection clause Robert insisted on before he passed. It ensures that in no circumstance, fraud, coercion, or manipulation, can the property be transferred without your direct consent in person, before a judge." I felt tears prick my eyes. Robert. Always thinking ahead. Always protecting me, even from beyond the grave. Carlos looked at me, his expression serious. "Aurora, you can expose them now. But are you ready? Once you begin, there is no way back." I nodded. They wanted war. Let them have it. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, Juliet burst into the apartment, her perfume sharp, her heels clicking like gunshots on my floor. She carried a folder of papers in her manicured hand. Ethan trailed behind her, his shoulders slumped, his eyes darting nervously. "Mother," Juliet said with her practiced sweetness that barely concealed the blade beneath, "we've been thinking. It would be safer, for you and everyone, if we managed the apartment. You know, legal responsibilities, taxes, upkeep, things that are a bit much at your age." She slid the papers across the table. Her eyes glittered. "It's just a formality." Ethan agrees. I looked at my son. My son. He couldn't even meet my gaze. His silence was consent enough. I let the moment linger. Let Juliet believe her trap was closing. Then, with deliberate calm, I opened the folder and spread the papers out. "These?" I said softly. "Yes, I've seen them before." Her smile faltered. "You have?" I reached into the drawer and pulled out Carlos's folder, dropping it heavily on the table. The sound echoed like a gavel in a courtroom. "I also know about the forged signature. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you really think you could steal from me in my own home?" Ethan's face drained of color. Juliet stiffened, her eyes narrowing like a cornered animal. Mother, it's not what you, Ethan began. Not what I think. My voice rose, sharp and cold. It's exactly what I think. You planned to cheat me out of my home. You, Ethan. My son. And you, I turned to Juliet, you've poisoned him with your greed. You wanted my life, my bakery, my dignity. But you underestimated me. I pulled out Robert's clause and slapped it on top of their false contract. Do you see this? This is your failure. My husband protected me better than either of you ever could. Legally, financially, spiritually, this apartment is untouchable. You will never have it. Not while I live. Not even when I die. Juliet's mask cracked then. Her sweetness vanished, replaced by raw contempt. You selfish old hag, she spat. You think you'll live forever? You think Ethan and I will just wait around until you rot in this place? You're pathetic. I leaned forward, my eyes burning into hers. Better pathetic than a viper who marries for profit. Better old and alone than young and rotten. Ethan flinched at my words, but said nothing. His silence was the loudest betrayal of all. I stood, my voice steady, commanding. Get out. Both of you. Leave my apartment before I call the police and charge you with fraud. Juliet's face twisted with rage, but Ethan pulled at her arm, muttering, Come on. They slammed the door behind them, their footsteps echoing down the hall. When the silence returned, I felt my body trembling, not with fear, but with triumph. For the first time in months, I wasn't prey. I was the hunter. That night, I sat by the window, the city lights glowing below me, and whispered to Robert, I did it, my love. They tried to destroy me, but I stood my ground. I kept our home. Yet even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't over. People like Juliet didn't give up so easily. And Ethan, my broken, weak son, was still under her spell. But now I had armor. Now I had weapons. And most importantly, now I had no fear. Because the mask had been ripped away. The world could finally see them for what they were. And soon, everyone would. Victory doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes quietly, like the dawn, steady and inevitable. For me, victory was not watching Juliet and Ethan squirm in the aftermath of their exposed fraud. It wasn't even about proving to the world that I had been right. Victory was something deeper, more sacred. It was reclaiming myself. After they stormed out of my apartment that day, the silence that followed was unlike any I had ever known. It was not heavy. It was not suffocating. It was clean, liberating, like a room finally rid of its ghosts. For the first time in years, I breathed without the weight of deceit pressing down on my chest. Of course, the gossip spread quickly. In a neighborhood where even the color of your curtains became conversation, my showdown with Juliet and Ethan became legend. Whispers followed me at the bakery, that poor woman, betrayed by her own son, others said, Aurora is stronger than we ever thought. And a few, the cruel ones, muttered, she deserved it for flaunting her independence. But I didn't care anymore. Their words could not wound me. I had already faced the worst humiliation a woman could endure, the slap of a daughter-in-law at my son's wedding, the betrayal of the boy I had raised with my whole heart. Compared to that, gossip was nothing but dust in the wind. One evening, I walked through the bakery after closing time, the air still fragrant with fresh bread. I touched the counter where Robert and I had once dreamed aloud about expansion, about one day handing the business to Ethan. A pang of sorrow rippled through me, but it was softer now, less jagged. Ethan had chosen his path. He had chosen greed over love, silence over loyalty. That was his burden to bear, not mine. I whispered to the memory of my husband, Robert, I'll keep this place alive. Not for Ethan, not for Juliet. For me. The next morning, I called Carlos again. This time, not for protection, but for liberation. Sell the apartment, I said simply. His surprise was audible even through the phone. Aurora, are you certain? That apartment has been your home for decades. Your memories. Memories live in the heart, I replied gently. Not in walls. I need a new beginning. A place where their shadows cannot follow me. And so, within weeks, the apartment was sold. The money was more than enough to buy a charming little house near the sea, small but warm, with a sunlit garden where I could grow roses and lavender. I called it Phoenix House, a reminder that even from ashes, something beautiful can rise. Juliet and Ethan, of course, tried one last desperate maneuver. Ethan called me, his voice strained, begging for forgiveness. Mother, please, we've been wrong. Juliet didn't mean it. We were under pressure. I listened in silence, then answered with a calm I didn't know I possessed. No, Ethan. You meant every choice you made. And now you must live with them. I release you from me. From my life. From my love. Whatever happens next, you are on your own. He cried, or pretended to, but I ended the call. For the first time, my heart did not break. It simply let go. With my new life came new rituals. In the mornings, I walked barefoot through the garden, the dew cool against my feet. I baked pastries not for customers, but for myself, for friends, for neighbors who quickly grew to love the scent drifting from my kitchen window. I even joined a small reading circle at the community center, where women my age shared stories of heartbreak, resilience, and second chances. One afternoon, as the group gathered, a woman leaned toward me and said, "Aurora, you are radiant these days. What's your secret?" I smiled, thinking of everything I had lost and everything I had gained. The secret, I said softly, is learning that love cannot be bought with money, and freedom is never too expensive. You just have to be brave enough to pay the price. They applauded, some with tears in their eyes. And in that moment, I realized my story was no longer just mine. It was a torch I could pass to others, a reminder that even in betrayal, there is rebirth. In the evenings, I sometimes sat on the porch of Phoenix House, watching the sunset paint the sea in gold and crimson. I thought of Robert, of the life we had built, of the son I had lost to greed. My heart ached, yes. But beneath the ache was peace. I had survived humiliation. I had endured betrayal. And I had risen. Aurora was no longer the old woman in the corner, mocked, pitted, underestimated. Aurora was free. Aurora was alive. And as the waves crashed against the shore, steady and eternal, I whispered the truth that had carried me through. True love cannot be bought. And freedom is never too expensive.